Neville, Regina, all the staff of Aid to the Church in Need, and dear friends, Bishop Lieb, it's a real honor to be here. And I don't think anybody slept during John Pontifex's talk. It was the subject matter that kept you awake. He said you can doze off if you like. He's a better man than me. I don't tolerate when people sleep while I talk, so I will try to keep you alert, and I will ask you questions. I'd like to put things in perspective, say something about aid to the church in need, move to the issue in Ukraine, and then finish with some concrete proposals. I'm very grateful to Church in Need because Church in Need put me through theology when I was a student 35 years ago. When Cardinal Slipy had been released from the Soviet camps after 18 years of the Gulag and came to Rome, set up a prototype of a university in Rome when there were only 300 Ukrainians in Italy. Now there's 700,000. And he invited us to prepare for working in Ukraine, to be seminarians of the Lviv diocese. When we went to the Roman universities and said, we're preparing to be priests in Ukraine and we want to create this university in Ukraine, the monsignors would pat us on the back and say, now, young man, you know, you will sooner be on Mars than in Ukraine. But it happened. It happened, and this is what the work of Church in Need is all about. It's believing in the mystery of God's presence, it's God's agency in this world. Are there any astronomers here? Anybody know something about astronomy? Can you tell us, what do astronomers say about the diameter of the universe? Somebody raised their hand back there? What's the diameter of the universe, the estimate? Okay, well, give us something, what you mean about it. 50 points? 50 or 50, right. That's the diameter or the radius? Diameter, okay. So 50 billion light years. Just think about how light goes 30,000 kilometers in a second. In a minute, that's what, 18 million kilometers in a minute. Think about it for an hour. Think about it for a day, a week, a month, a year. Now multiply that by 50 billion. That is what science is telling us about the universe. And we believe in a God that holds that universe on his right hand. And that same God descends and ascends onto a cross, becomes very small for us. And he doesn't, in his work, force everybody with the power that he has, with the omnipotence. He proposes. He makes a loving proposal that we can reject, and we do it often. And he didn't, for some reason, set up CNN or BBC. He started speaking directly. And when the words weren't enough, he stopped speaking and he witnessed, just with his body, with his life. We hear today, and through the work of Church in Need and other agencies, of the great needs that there are in the world. Our job is not to fix the world. We're not going to fix the dimensions of the problem, but we can witness, and that's what the cross is, and that's what your donation is. Because sometimes we can get discouraged that we don't fix the problem. But that is not what we are summoned to and what Church in Need summons us to. And I want to thank Church in Need for this evangelical vocation that it gives us. Because it's not just the project. The projects are the instrument for the greater call, for us to witness as our Lord did, and become small and become concrete. Church in Need is the greatest benefactor of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, which for 50 years, for half a century almost, was the biggest illegal church in the world and the biggest body of social opposition in the Soviet Union. It had 3,000 priests in 1939. How many were left in 1989? It was in the sermon. 300. What was their average age? 70. 25 years later, largely through the help of Church in Need, how many priests are there? 3,000 for what kind of population? 5 million people. How many seminarians? 800 seminarians. And the number of priests is growing by 100 every year. I'm one of those priests educated by Church in Need. And there's thousands of them. And the catechetical programs and the churches that are being built and the different ministries that are being developed is what you are supporting, what you are doing. What has been happening in Ukraine? Ukraine is just a small part, this small corner of what was the Soviet Union. A land of incredible suffering, but even worse, of diabolical attempts to change what a human being is, to cross out Christian anthropology and create a Homo Sovieticus at any cost. In this country, which is the size of France, which today has 46 million, 44 million people, in the 20th century, between 15 and 17 million people were killed. Between 1914 and 45, every second adult and every fourth woman died an unnatural death. The system killed systematically, so people developed reflexes against the system. Any relationship is dangerous because somebody can turn you in, even your parents, even your children. In every Soviet city of any size, of a bigger size, there was the Pavlik Morozov Street. Pavlik Morozov, little Paul Morozov, became part of the Soviet legend for turning his father into the KGB. And that was the model for every Soviet child. Fear was inculcated, put into human relations, human hearts, human thoughts and minds. It sunk into the DNA. When you don't trust, you can't do business, you can't do politics. It's hard to maintain a marriage. But if the killing goes on from generation to generation and it's systemic, you develop a culture of fear. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. It has the best land in the world for grain. Hitler tried to export the land in train cars, this black earth. On that land, after a plentiful harvest of 1932, Stalin decided he would break the back of the peasantry that didn't want to plug into his system. And so he took all the grain reserves, every last potato, Soldiers went from house to house, requisitioning the harvest. And in the winter and spring of 33, 4, maybe 5, maybe more million people died of starvation as the country was exporting grain to fund the industrial and military complex. You can see the death rate. 25,000 people dying per day. And nobody could talk about this for 50 years. Even if 8 of your brothers or sisters died, you could not speak about it. Even if your mother ate your brother to survive, this was not mentioned. Take a city of Lviv, where the university is, which I worked for, a city in 1939 of 300,000 people. Many nationalities. All the Jews were wiped out. 30% of the population was Jewish. 98% of the Jews were killed. The Poles were deported, also 30% of the population. Ukrainians were only 18%, because for centuries they were discriminated in this city. They were decimated. The city, by the mid-'80s, was a city of 1 million people, from 60,000 to 1 million, through forced urbanization. A city where the KGB had the highest pro capita rate of any city of the Soviet Union, a city of fear. You come to the city, it looks normal. But the fear is like radiation, which you can't smell it, you can't taste it, but it affects the lifestyle. Most Ukrainians were isolated. They couldn't get out. They didn't get out of the country. Many didn't get out of the region. Corruption, for many reasons, which we don't have time to get into, became endemic in the Soviet period and even worse after. Ukraine ranks 144th on the corruption index. The world saw the degree of this corruption when the palaces of the ousted president were open to the public, which are now being turned into museums of corruption. Nobody looted them. People, you saw the pictures of people big-eyed walking through these buildings. In this house, $10 million were used just for the light fixtures. Pretty nice lighting there. The Yanukovych family and their whole network, their cronies, so to speak, in 5 years defrauded the country of about $100 billion US. That's 2 annual budgets of the country. So what was the Maidan? Maidan is a Turkic Arabic word which means it exists, it's used in Lebanon. It's the square. But for Ukrainians, it's not just a physical place, it's an agora, it's a place of convening, of discerning together, of making decisions by the community. And this is the main square of the city, the center of the capital. A beautiful, light, flowered square, which became a point of decision-making beginning last November. It had been in previous times, during the Orange Revolution in 2001 as well. In Lviv, our students of the Catholic University were the first on the Lviv Maidan, because these squares sprouted up throughout Ukraine, in Brussels, in London, in Paris, in hundreds of cities where Ukrainians were present and friends of Ukrainians joined. It was a big festival with song, with music, non-stop music through the night for months. Ukrainians wanted those things that are fundamentally part of the European tradition. The dignity of the human person, something that comes out of the gospel, the dignity of women, justice before the law. but they also knew that they can make a contribution to Europe. It was a protest of millions with smiles, with song, started by young people, but then joined by people of all walks of life, of all classes. The important thing was that 92% of the people on the square were there of their own accord, and they were sacrificing. This was the square in Kyiv. They were coming from all parts of the country, traveling 500, 600 kilometers at their own expense, 1 time, 4 times, 10 times in a matter of months. It was cold, sometimes 20 degrees below zero. Think about it in London. I don't know if there ever has been that kind of temperature. Standing in that cold for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. How about the whole night? How about many nights? How about 2 months? The Maidan was very well organized. Food service, health service, psychological service, a Maidan university, a Maidan library, a Maidan theater, and nonstop music. Against provocateurs and riot police, the people sang, they played, and they prayed. Through the night, on the hour, every hour, there was interconfessional prayer. It was a powerful ecumenical moment with the church in the public square, with the people when it was cold, dark, and most dangerous. There you can see a priest holding a cross as he stands between the crush between the riot police and the protesters. The church was there with the people. The pastors, in the words of Pope Francis, had the smell of the sheep in joyous times and in times of sorrow. Here's an Orthodox church that became a hospital after the first violent attack of the riot police on December 1st. Seminarians who you are funding, manned the night. That's when the Greek Catholic seminarians came out. They slept during the day, and the different seminaries from the country came in at different times to evangelize the people, to be with the people in the night, on the square, in the winter. Here I stand with some other bishops, December 11th. In the night, the riot police tried to clear the square with violence. I wear a hat given to me by Mustafa Dzhemiliev, whose picture you will see later, the leader of the Crimean Tatars, a man who spent many years in the Gulag, who once held a hunger strike for 303 days. He gave me that hat, and I wore it as a sign of brotherhood between the Christians and the Muslims in this movement, because all the churches were together. And they spoke as a mantra 4 points. The government needs to listen to the people, no violence, don't divide the country, and dialogue is the only way out of this situation. The Moscow Patriarchate, the Autocephalous Orthodox Church, the Kievan Patriarchate, the Roman Catholics, the Greek Catholics, the Protestants, the Jews, the Muslims were together. On the Maidan, until the government got violent, against the Crimean annexation, against the invasion by Russia of eastern Ukraine. Prayer was public. Prayer was palpable. Liturgies there, weddings, confessions in the snow, prayer at the cordons between the riot police and the people in times of impending violence. People on their knees as death began to lurk. This is the first Greek Catholic prayer tent. It was too small, so another one was put up. Father Mikhailo Demid, my predecessor as rector at our university, spent many weeks there. Here we are together with an Orthodox theologian, Konstantin Sigov, 25 minutes before the riot police began throwing incendiary bombs. This priest was only able to save the chalice and the gospel books. The icons, the whole chapel burned down. I watched it because I was in the chapel and then went to speak from the stage, and this is the perspective that opened up before my eyes. That was February 18th. A few people were already killed that day by the riot police, but the real violence, the real massacre happened 2 days later on February 20th. In that beautiful square with the cameras running, CNN, BBC, light, camera, the action was snipers shooting unarmed civilians, unarmed students. That day, 80 people were shot in that square in a matter of a few hours. The priests were there with them. Giving them their last rites. The dead were called the Heavenly Hundred. Nazar's the youngest. Here are some more. Ihor Kostenko, the 22-year-old, was voted by Wikipedia as the Wikipedian of the year for the whole world, because he was a frequent contributor, but also because he gave his life for principles. The funerals were held in the presence of tens and hundreds of thousands of people in the center and then in their hometowns. One of our lecturers, Bohdan Solchanik, was shot that morning. He was getting ready to get married with another one of our graduates, a brilliant young historian, pure in his sentiment for dignity. More of the Heavenly Hundred. They came from all parts of the country. I'd like to leave you with a sense that you won't get from BBC, because BBC is not interested in this. How much faith, prayer, presence of the church, and ecumenism in this so-called divided country was evident on the Maidan is present today. Priests from different confessions praying together. A mufti and a Greek Catholic priest in Donetsk in eastern Ukraine. The mufti of Crimea and the Orthodox bishop in Crimea. A Lutheran pastor. The evangelical prayer tent. A rabbi. The Jews took upon themselves the task of clarifying this hateful propaganda from Russia that the Maidan is a neo-fascist, anti-Semitic action. All the Jewish organizations supported the Maidan. And you might have seen their articles and ads in the world's newspapers saying, "We Jews are here on the Maidan." And Ukraine is a place where we flourish, where we want to live in dignity. In June, the association agreement, which was the pretext, Yanukovych refused to sign the association with Europe, although a 10-year preparation had gone on until the week before he was saying he would sign it. That became the pretext for these protests. In June, the agreement was signed. Just a few weeks ago, it was ratified overwhelmingly, both in the European Parliament and in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian Parliament. In one sense, the Euromaidan won. But this pilgrimage from fear to dignity was punished by war. Because when people know who they are, when they know they're the beloved sons and daughters of God, like Christ, who came out of his baptism with his identity clear, you can take on the cross. You can witness. You can be free. You can't be manipulated. And so the country needs to be driven back into that hole of fear. Annexation of Crimea. There were no Russian soldiers there. You heard it. BBC reported it. Allegedly, they would say, the Ukrainian officials say there are Russian soldiers. And you will read it today. Still, Ukrainian officials say something that the Russians deny, that there are Russian soldiers in Ukraine. How much more evidence does one need? In a day when the contents of your wallet almost can be photographed from a satellite. The Ukrainian army, overmatched in Crimea, responded with peaceful, nonviolent resistance and confronted the Russian soldiers just with the flag. Here's a painful moment when Ukrainian soldiers were forced down to bring down the Ukrainian flags in different places. Mustafa Dzhemiliev, the leader of the Tatars, who have endured a number of genocidal moments at the hands of Russian authorities, who are adamant regarding their Ukrainian nationality, their Ukrainian citizenship. He is now barred from entering Crimea. So when the Tatars in May were commemorating the 70th anniversary of their total deportation at the end of World War II by Stalin, he came to the border of the Crimean Peninsula, and 5,000 of his brothers and sisters joined him there. The annexation has wreaked havoc on the Crimeans. The Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church's mission there is hanging on a thread. All five priests had to leave. New priests come in for 90-day sessions. The mission is in great danger, as is the mission of the Kievan Patriarchate Orthodox Church, which is not part of the Moscow jurisdiction. And of course, there's the loss of Ukraine's Black Sea Fleet and the gas shelf. And then came the war in the East. Again, no Russian soldiers. It started out as the activity of terrorists. But when Ukrainian forces began controlling the situation, the Russian authorities sent in more weapons. And one of them was a Buk rocket, which shot down the Malaysian airliner, which we don't hear about anymore, despite the fact that 298 people were killed. 80 children, 3 infants, a broad intercontinental representations of the victims who are being sacrificed for the reconstitution of a Russian empire. Here you can see the missile launcher returning to Russia. It had 4 missiles, one of them is not there. This is just journalistic type photography. You can imagine what kind of information the secret services of the world have. But not all of this is being shown and exposed. Father Tikhon was held captive and tortured, a Roman Catholic priest. Father Pavel, another Roman Catholic priest, held by the terrorists. 8 Protestant believers, including 2 deacons who were the sons of the local pastor, brutally killed. 3 Orthodox priests have died. The figures, like in many conflict areas are difficult to establish. These are very conservative estimates. The country is being destabilized. Billions of dollars worth of infrastructure in the country has been destroyed. Factories, bridges, roads, airports. Some of the recent economic evaluations. Industrial productivity is down by 21%, and the local currency has been devalued by 38%. That means people have lost 38% of the value of their money. There's great trauma in the country. People have been part of this, watching this for 2-3 hours a day on the internet. And there's widespread post-traumatic shock. As we heard regarding the Middle East, there's need for post-trauma care. What can we do? We should pray and work for peace. It's very important to critically analyze what you see, read, and hear. And once you know part of the story, talk about it, speak about it, tell somebody else. There's a humanitarian crisis that is about to break out. The winter is cold. Russia has declared a gas cutoff. It will be a terrible winter for a crippled economy, for a country that is still from day to day fearing full-scale invasion. It's important to rebuild homes, but even more so to rebuild trust and to foster reconciliation. The students of the Ukrainian Catholic University for the last 7 months have been inviting students from Eastern Ukraine to the city. Different weeks, 100 at a time. It's a small school with 1,600 students. But it's a witness. We won't solve the whole problem, but we can witness. Others are going to the east to rebuild schools and homes. We can make a difference. The difference is not in the quantity, but it's in the purity of our witness. I don't know the protocol, for these type of meetings, so if I break rules, I apologize in advance. It's better, to not ask permission, but to apologize later. I want to encourage you to reach deep into your pockets. And I want to encourage you to make a contribution for Iraq, for Syria, for the people in grinding poverty in Africa, for the poor in Latin America that the church is serving through aid to the church in need. Make a donation that you really feel, something that crimps at least a little bit your lifestyle. Make that donation, and then today, go home and tell somebody what you heard, at least one person, and say, I think this is an organization that deserves your attention. These are stories that you need to know about, and this is something what you can do. I have found in my life that when we give, it's the greatest thing that we can do. It really is a gratifying experience to give life, to give faith, to give hope, to rebuild trust. And that is the supreme merit of this organization that we all love, Aid to the Church in Need. It gives hope, it rebuilds trust, it fosters faith, and it gives much life. Thank you for your attention.